You ever had a neighbor so entitled, so out of line, that they made you question reality? Like, is this person really this bold? Or am I losing my mind? That's exactly the situation Elijah Benson found himself in. A retired police officer finally enjoying the quiet life after decades on the force. He wasn't some cranky old man shaking his fist at kids playing too close to his lawn. Nah, Elijah was easygoing, the type to keep to himself. His home in Phoenix, Arizona was his sanctuary. In his backyard, that was his slice of paradise. A beautiful crystal clear pool, a shaded patio, a space designed for peace. He'd worked hard for it. Long, grueling years of dealing with people at their worst, responding to chaos, violence, and nonsense day after day. Now he just wanted to relax. No badge, no stress, no drama. But then there was Deborah Whitmore. From the moment she moved in next door, she made it clear she thought the rules didn't apply to her. Elijah had seen people like her before, loud, entitled, always finding a way to be the victim when called out. She wasn't openly hostile, but she had a way of looking through him, like he was just there, some obstacle in her world that she had to tolerate. At first, she'd just make little comments. "Wow, Elijah, that pool looks amazing. Must be nice to have something like that in this heat." Or, "My kids would love a swim sometime. Too bad we don't have one on our side." Harmless, right? Except she wasn't just talking. She was planting seeds. And sure enough, one day Elijah comes home and finds Deborah in his pool. Not just dipping her toes, not just peeking over the fence. No, full on, stretched out on a pool float. Sunglasses on, sipping a drink like she owned the place. For a moment, he just stood there blinking. Because surely this wasn't happening. Deborah, his voice was calm, measured, but firm. She barely looked up. "Oh, hey, Elijah, I figured you wouldn't mind. It's just so hot today. She said it so casually, like she was supposed to be there. Like she was doing him a favor by using his pool while he was gone. Elijah took a deep breath, reminding himself he was no longer a cop. No need for confrontation. Just handle this like a reasonable adult. "I do mind, actually. This is my property. You need to leave." That should have been the end of it. A normal person would have been embarrassed, apologized, and never done it again. But Deborah, she just laughed. "Oh, come on, it's just water. What's the harm?" And that's when Elijah knew this wasn't a mistake. She didn't just cross the line. She didn't believe there was a line. Eventually, after a tense few moments, she huffed, rolled her eyes, and climbed out of the pool like he was the one being unreasonable. "Fine, but honestly, Elijah, you're being a little dramatic." He thought that was the end of it. But it happened again and again. Some days he'd hear splashing while sitting inside, only to look out the window and see her there. Other times he'd come home to wet footprints leading from the gate back to her yard. Each time her excuses got bolder. "Oh, I was just cooling off real quick." "I figured you wouldn't care since you weren't using it." "We're neighbors, Elijah. Neighbors share things." No, neighbors respect boundaries. It wasn't about the pool, it was about control, about the fact that she felt entitled to something that wasn't hers. And no matter how many times he told her to stop, she just kept doing it. But the last straw? One weekend, Elijah had his grandkids over. They were excited to finally use the pool until they found Deborah already in it. His 3-year-old granddaughter clung to his leg, whispering, "Grandpa, why is that lady in your pool?" That was it. Elijah wasn't about to let this woman ruin his peace or set the example that people could just take what they wanted without consequences. He wasn't calling the cops. He was the law for years. He knew how this would play out. So instead, he decided to make sure Deborah regretted every single time she ignored his warnings. But Deborah had no idea what was coming. Elijah knew patience. He'd spent over 25 years in law enforcement, dealing with every kind of nonsense a person could imagine. He'd broken up fights, talked down armed suspects, and diffused situations that could have ended a whole lot worse. But this was different. This was his home, his personal space. And this woman had the audacity to treat it like a public pool. At first, he tried handling it the way he always did, with logic. He installed a taller fence, didn't matter. Somehow she still found a way over. He locked the gate. Next thing he knew, he caught her slipping through a gap in the hedge. He put up security cameras. And you know what she did? She posed for them. Posed. As if she were on some kind of twisted vacation. Elijah was trying to stay calm, trying not to be the angry black man in the neighborhood. But Deborah was pushing him there. Then came the final straw. It was a scorcher, one of those Arizona afternoons where even the shade felt like an oven. Elijah had spent the morning running errands, looking forward to finally taking a dip in his own damn pool. But when he pulled into his driveway, something felt off. The side gate was slightly open. His stomach tightened. He already knew. Elijah walked around back, and there she was. Deborah, laid out on a lounge chair in her bikini, sipping a margarita like she paid the mortgage. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. This was a full-blown violation. And what did she do when she saw him? She waved. "Oh, hey, you're home early," like he was interrupting her day. Elijah's jaw clenched. "Deborah, get out." She groaned, sitting up slowly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, come on, Elijah. You're really going to make a big deal out of this? It's just a pool." "No, it's my pool. And I've told you over and over, this is not okay." She sighed dramatically, like he was the unreasonable one. "Well, maybe if you were a little friendlier, I wouldn't feel the need to sneak in." Elijah took a step forward. He could feel his pulse in his temples. "Let me make something clear to you, Deborah. You are trespassing again, and if I call the cops, you're looking at criminal charges." And that's when she did something that sent him over the edge. She laughed. "Oh, please, what are you going to do? Have me arrested for swimming?" That was it. This woman wasn't just entitled. She was daring him to do something about it. She thought she was untouchable, thought he wouldn't follow through. And that's when Elijah made up his mind. Fine, she wanted to play games. She was about to learn the hard way. But Deborah had no clue that the man she'd been messing with wasn't just some passive, retired neighbor. He was a cop for over 2 decades. He knew the law better than anyone in that neighborhood, and he was about to use that knowledge to make sure she regretted every single second of her foolishness. But Deborah wouldn't see it coming. Elijah wasn't the type to lose his temper. He'd spent too many years keeping his cool in situations that would make most people snap. But this wasn't about anger. This was about teaching a lesson, and he knew exactly how to do it. See, Deborah thought she had nothing to lose. She wasn't afraid of a confrontation. She wasn't afraid of getting caught. In her mind, the worst that could happen was Elijah yelling at her again. She had no idea she just pushed the wrong man too far. The first step of his plan, he let her think she won. That evening, instead of fuming, instead of calling the police, Elijah acted like nothing happened. No more warnings, no more arguments, just silence. And silence makes people nervous. The next day, he even gave her a small nod when they crossed paths outside. Not a friendly nod, just enough to make her wonder. Why isn't he mad? Why didn't he yell this time? Elijah wanted her to get comfortable. And sure enough, a few days later, she came back. Right after he left for what she thought was his usual afternoon errands. Only this time, he was ready. See, while Deborah had been busy treating his pool like a resort, Elijah had been making some calls. One of his closest friends from the force, Officer Damian Brooks, was still active duty in Phoenix PD. And lucky for Elijah, Brooks was working that day. "You sure about this, man?" Brooks asked over the phone. Elijah chuckled. "Oh, I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He didn't want Deborah arrested. That was too easy, too simple. No, he wanted her to feel what it was like to have zero control over a situation she thought she owned. So as soon as Elijah got the motion alert on his phone that someone was in his backyard, he knew it was go time. He texted Brooks one word, "Now." And within minutes, 2 squad cars pulled up in front of Deborah's house. Sirens on. Elijah was parked just down the street, watching as the officers got out and made their way to his backyard. And then came the best part. Deborah, stretched out in the pool like she belonged there, suddenly heard the unmistakable crackle of a police radio. "Ma'am, step out of the pool immediately." Elijah had never seen someone move so fast. She practically fell out of the float, splashing like a drowned rat, scrambling to cover herself with a towel. Wait, This isn't what it looks like, she stammered, but the officers weren't having it. Ma'am, we received a report of an active trespassing situation. You need to explain why you are on this property without permission. Elijah had to bite back a grin, because the panic on Deborah's face? Priceless. She was stammering, scrambling for words. This is just a misunderstanding. I know the owner. We're friends. That's when Elijah finally stepped forward. From behind the officers, he spoke calmly. Friends? Deborah? We're friends now? She whipped around so fast it was like her neck snapped. Elijah, tell them it's fine. This is just a mix-up. But Elijah didn't say a word. He just pulled out his phone and hit play. And suddenly, through the speakers, came Deborah's own voice, clear as day, from a previous security recording. Oh, please, what are you going to do? Have me arrested? For swimming. The officers just stared at her. Deborah's face drained of color. Because this was not a mix-up. This was proof. And for the first time, she looked genuinely terrified. She turned back to the cops, her hands shaking. I didn't mean it like that. I was just joking. But jokes don't hold up in court. One of the officers shook his head. Ma'am, do you understand how serious this is? You're looking at a potential trespassing charge, and based on this recording, it's clear this was intentional. Deborah was flipping out now. Elijah, please, I wasn't thinking. It won't happen again, I swear. And now Elijah had her right where he wanted her. But instead of pressing charges, he leaned in close and said just loud enough for her to hear. Now, Deborah, what are you going to do if I decide to be a little friendlier this time? Her eyes widened, because now she understood. Now she knew what it felt like to be in a situation where someone else held all the power. Elijah let the tension sit for a moment, then finally turned to the officers. I don't want to press charges, but I do want a trespassing warning officially on file. So if this ever happens again? He let that last part hang in the air. One of the officers nodded, understood. And just like that, Deborah was escorted off his property, dripping wet, still clutching her margarita glass. And the best part? Now, every single person on the block knew what she did. But the real punishment, that came next, because Elijah wasn't done yet, and Deborah's humiliation was only just beginning. For the next few days, Elijah barely saw Deborah. She wasn't outside watering her plants. She wasn't walking her dog. She wasn't casually bumping into him like she used to. She was hiding. And that was already a small victory. But Elijah wasn't done. See, a simple warning wasn't enough. People like Deborah don't learn from warnings. They learn from embarrassment. They learn when their perfect little world is cracked open for everyone to see. So Elijah did what any good neighbor would do. He made sure everybody knew. The next morning, Elijah got up early, took his time sipping his coffee on the porch, and then he went to work. First, he updated his homeowners association about the trespassing issue. Nothing dramatic, just a simple, polite email expressing concern over a neighbor repeatedly entering his property without permission. The HOA took it very seriously. Within 24 hours, an official notice was sent to every resident in the neighborhood, reminding them that trespassing on private property would not be tolerated. And just like that, Deborah's little secret wasn't a secret anymore. But Elijah wasn't finished. Next, he decided to have a little fun. He printed flyers, nothing mean, nothing over the top, just a simple pool rules and safety guidelines sheet with bold letters, private property, trespassers will be reported. And then he posted them on the neighborhood bulletin board, in the community center, even at the local coffee shop. And the best part, he made sure to pin one directly on the notice board at Deborah's yoga studio. Now, everywhere Deborah went, people knew, and the whispers started. Neighbors who used to wave at her started looking at her differently. The friendly small talk? Gone. People who had always smiled at her in passing now only gave her polite, awkward nods, because nobody wants to be the person caught trespassing like a fool. By the end of the week, Deborah looked wrecked. Elijah spotted her one morning, rushing to her car in oversized sunglasses, keeping her head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone. And that's when he knew. She got the message. But the final touch, that came when the HOA president herself, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Linda Avery, paid Deborah a visit. Elijah didn't hear the whole conversation, but he sure as hell saw Deborah's reaction, standing in her doorway, arms crossed, face redder than a stop sign, nodding furiously while Linda laid down the law. And when Linda left, Deborah slammed her door shut so hard it rattled the windows. And just like that, Elijah had won. He had his peace back. But most importantly, Deborah finally learned something she should have understood a long time ago. Respect isn't optional, and neither are boundaries. And just like that, the problem was solved. Elijah didn't see Deborah in his pool again. Ever. No more wet footprints leading to her yard. No more margaritas floating in his water. No more entitled attitude acting like she belonged on his property. She avoided him like the plague. At first, she tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, walking around with that stiff, forced smile, pretending nothing had happened. But the neighborhood knew. And even worse, she knew that they knew. The casual whispers, the polite but distant interactions. She felt it. And if there was one thing people like Deborah hated more than being caught, it was being embarrassed. She tried to sell her house a few months later. Didn't last long, though. Guess not a lot of people are eager to buy from the notorious trespasser. Elijah, on the other hand, he got his peace back. And let me tell you, that first swim after all of this, glorious. No stress, no interruptions, just him, his pool, and the satisfaction of knowing he handled it his way. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about a pool. It was about boundaries, about respect, about standing up for yourself without losing your dignity. See, some people will take everything if you let them. They'll push, inch by inch, until suddenly what's yours doesn't even feel like yours anymore. And if you don't stop them, they'll just keep going. Elijah didn't have to yell, didn't have to throw a fit, didn't have to become the problem just to fix the problem. He played it smart, and he made sure Deborah would never forget it. So if there's anything to take away from this, set your boundaries, enforce them. And if someone keeps pushing, make sure they regret it. Now let me ask you, have you ever dealt with someone like Deborah? What did you do about it? Drop your story into the comments, because I know y'all have some wild ones. And if you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, there's plenty more where this came from.